attending trainings. That's how I got involved with this organization, right? And so I felt really special being a part of this, and I want to give back.
They want to make sure they're talking to somebody who gets them. And if you can roll with their humor, or you can roll with how they describe things and not be shocked by it or not be offended by it.
I think there's a big piece about helping to normalize what their experience really looks like, that when they come home or come off shift, that there's a stress dump, if you will.
And so I want them to feel like I can hear them from their perspective, and I'm learning from them, and I'm not trying to force upon them the right way to do therapy, because there is no right way to do therapy. We heal in all different ways.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience, along with Bonnie Rimley, LCSW EMT, and Dr. Stacy Raymond. I'm David Dashinger. Today we're pleased to introduce this Clinicians Guide Masterclass focused on powerful ways to set up your practice to work with first responders. And in today's episode, we'll hear from 4 expert mental health clinicians who have successfully built thriving practices centered on serving first responders.
My name is Jennifer Spirito. I'm a licensed clinical social worker out of West Hartford, Connecticut.
My name is Kurt Fuchs. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I am EMDR trained clinician to work with PTSD and other types of trauma-related diagnoses.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Luft. I am a licensed professional counselor. I own a group practice in Ridgefield, Connecticut.
My name is Kristin Lewis. I am a marriage and family therapist in Groton, Connecticut. I specialize in working with military service members and first responders and their families.
They're all 4 members of the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team, and they'll share invaluable tips, strategies, and best practices to effectively support the unique needs of this community and help you elevate your own practice. Stacy and Bonnie will be weighing in with their valuable insights as we listen to the clinicians' clips throughout the podcast. So don't miss this opportunity to learn from the best.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
With vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rimley, LCSW EMTB.
So we invite you to like and subscribe. Our YouTube channel is Respond to Resilience. We're on Facebook, Respond to Wellness Inc. and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Bonnie, I'd like you to kind of introduce what we're going to be doing today by playing clips from clinicians from the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team talking about elevating your practice.
Sure. So we thought we'd do something a little bit different this time and showcase 4 of our other FCTRT. For those of you who don't know, Fairfield County Trauma Response Team clinicians. These happen to be 4 newer members of the team, so we're really excited to bring their faces to all of you and for you to hear what they have to say. Stacy and I are both long-term members of the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team. I'm one of the clinical directors. Our team's focus is the mental health of first responders. So we provide education on PTSI and treatment with EMDR therapy and post-traumatic growth. And we also do diffusings, debriefings, grief debriefs, as we call them, when there may be a line of duty death or a death of one's own in their own department. And we're really, really passionate about our work. We all have private practices. There are about 30 of us. And we all specialize in first responders. So it's a very, very unique group of clinicians, and we strive to be our best. We are constantly learning and trying to access new information and cutting edge techniques really to use with our first responders. So Stacy and I are really excited to have this conversation today and to look at these clips with all of you. And we hope that it really helps you access some new skills for yourself.
Fantastic. Stacy, did you want to add anything to that?
We are available to go to any department that wants to hear our presentation on post-traumatic stress, and we can also educate about EMDR, which is a very efficient way to deal with post-traumatic stress, bad calls. So that's important, and so don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll come for free.
Fantastic. And while we're talking about it, what's the best way to find Fairfield County Trauma Response Team if somebody's interested in getting more information?
So we have a website, www.fctrt.org, or you can find us on Instagram. We have an FCTRT page on Instagram as well.
Okay. Well, let's move to the clips and hear from these four clinicians. The first question is, do you have any ground rules for first responders who work with you?
What I really like to do is to start talking with first responders, and I have a couple of rules. I call them rules of being in the room with me, and the rules are language doesn't matter, that anything goes in here. There is no topic that's off, that we can't talk about. Everything is on the table for us, and I feel like being able to set that up for them is opening and inviting any type of question or topic that might feel vulnerable in other settings.
So Stacy, why don't you comment on that?
Well, I think that's critical with first responders, because I think a lot of them come in hesitant to share the worst of the worst calls that they've been on. And they kind of wonder, do I have to stay in bounds? Do I have to play small here so that I don't upset the clinician? So I like Jennifer's open invitation that all topics, any type of language, foul language, because that kind of goes hand in hand with some first responders. It's okay. Just be yourself and tell me about what you've been through.
I think it's also great that the way Jennifer presented that was in such a way that it opens the doors, but it also validates that she understands the culture, that she understands that those things will and can come up, and she's giving them permission before anything even starts. So I think that's a great way to let your first responders know that it's a safe place for them and that you understand them.
So we're going to go to clip number 2. The question for this one is, do you find there are nuances between the cultures of fire, police, EMS, and 911?
I think that everyone wants to be heard for their unique experience. They don't want us to place them under an umbrella of a first responder, because each experience that they have is different from one another. So fire is going to experience something different than the police officers would experience, right? Just the nature of the job is different. The camaraderie, the friends, the loneliness, all of that comes into play. And so if we put them together under one umbrella, what we're saying to them, we're negating their personal experience.
I think that Bonnie captured it 100% there. We all know the overarching umbrella of the first responder community, but there are so many nuances, and none of us, even those of us who work largely with first responders in our practices, we can't assume that we know everyone's experience. So it's important what she's pointing out in terms of asking, what is your experience like? Because even no two police officers' experience is alike. They're in different departments. They have different roles, different titles. So it's really important that she's pointing out that we respect, honor, and ask about those nuances.
Yeah, I second all of that. You can't assume that because you're working with a police officer that what they're going to say and what they've experienced with their command staff and the morale in their department is going to transfer over to another police officer. You just can't assume that. So it's a blank slate when you sit with a first responder, to just not make any assumptions.
At the core of every community beats the heart of its first responders, ever present on the front line, making the impossible look routine. Through the relentless pressure and the unseen scars, our frontline warriors silently battle the stress of the job. It's crucial they armor up mentally and emotionally, not just for the community they safeguard, but for the families they return to. Supporting the wellness and mental health of first responders is priority number one. By championing their well-being, we're ensuring they're unstoppable, both in the line of duty and in life. Step up for the titans who protect us, because when they're firing on all cylinders, they're not just first responders, they're game changers. Join us. Visit ResponderTV.com to be the difference.
So our next clip, what does it mean to be culturally competent?
I feel pretty connected to what's going on, and every house is different. So knowing the culture of one house doesn't mean you know the culture of every house. So it really is asking individually what their perception of their own house's culture is and how they fit into it or don't fit into it or what they'd like to change about it. So being culturally competent means asking questions about what that culture means to that person in that environment, not making assumptions that it's across the board.
Yeah, I agree with what Kurt's saying there. I would expand cultural competence to also include spending time at departments, doing ride-alongs, talking to, all different ranks if you can, because you'll get a sense of, what they have to deal with that's different from another rank. So I would add that. And also, attending conferences about first responders and what they're dealing with. Definitely reading books on working with first responders in therapy.
I also think it's important to share with our own clients statistics or information that we've gleaned from the books that we've read or the conferences that we've attended, because it shows that we care, that we're interested in the material, and that not only do we want to know it so that we can impart it into our work, but that we want to share it with them to see what they might want to do with that information, or how does it strike them? Does it help them want to join their peer support team? Do they want to bring that information back to their PD or FD and have us in to do a talk for the team? So I think that cultural competency, there's so many layers to it. It's us taking that effort and showing the effort of cultural competency that really matters.
Okay, great answers. Next clip is, how do you take feedback from first responders and use it to constructively address their mental health needs?
Yeah, so the experience of this population is different than the general public. So ensuring that we are collaborating and I'm asking the questions that get us to a space of higher learning and understanding where people are coming from and what they're experiencing. What's important about that is that the actions that I take leave a mark on that patient or that client, right? And so I want them to feel like I can hear them from their perspective and I'm learning from them, and I'm not trying to force upon them the right way to do therapy, because there is no right way to do therapy. We heal in all different ways, and I want to offer all of those modalities.
So I take a very client-centered approach to what Bonnie said, and I couldn't agree with her more. The client drives the ship of the therapy. So what are they looking to get out of therapy? What do they want their quality of life to be when they are going through and when they conclude therapy? And what can I do to supplement that? Those are the things that I really focus on. And if there are other techniques or strategies or skills that I know that I can add to their bucket that will accentuate those goals and facilitate those goals happening, then that's what I'm going to do with them. And it's a very engaging and verbal process of back and forth and asking questions about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add to that, I also am a client-centered therapist. I usually tell all my clients, regardless if they're first responders or not, but I think it's even more important with first responders because of the shift work that they do, that, if they feel like they didn't get enough sleep last night, that they don't think that they can do a full EMDR session today, because it can be a little bit draining if you get into the nitty gritty, some intense calls, that they may feel tired after the EMDR session. And if they're heading into shift or they didn't sleep well from a previous shift, just for them to be honest with me, and that I'm not going to assume that they're dodging doing the work. Maybe we use that session to just recap, right, where you started, where you are now, and where you're heading. So just to be sensitive to that, because they might be tired. And they're not the type to say, hey, I just want to let you know I'm tired today. So because they push through, because they're first responders. So just to be aware of that.
We don't talk about that, needing sleep or being tired. Yeah. I just want to take it a step further too. So, first responders, we've talked about this before, kind of have this, get it done mentality, in a timely fashion.
Yes.
So how does that factor into therapy with first responders, and how do you gauge their progress or their satisfaction with the progress? Is there a dialogue to say, we're getting to a place where we could look at wrapping up, or, you're in a good place for now and you can always come back? How do you word that?
There is. And I also have my own perspective on that, just being a first responder myself and having done EMDR therapy. I think that the proof is really in the pudding. And when responders see progress and they see it in an efficient and timely manner, that resonates with them, because they're trained to go into a situation that's chaotic and figure out how to fix it, and move forward and learn from it. And we're trained to do that same thing with the brain. We go into a chaotic brain, figure out what needs to happen. And yes, we're communicating with them all along about that. But I find that the first responders feel and see the progress very quickly, and they like that. They respond well to that. They know that it works and it jives with their viewpoint of the world and how things should get done. So when we work the way they do on them, they love it. And there's buy-in. And that's when they're going to tell their friends and their peers to go do this therapy. That sounds bizarre.
And it is important, again, with any client to ask, how do you feel about the progress that you've made so far? And where do you think we're heading next? And, do you think weekly is still a good idea? You want to do every other week? And start talking about termination, that, once we clear out a lot of your, most of your the worst of your calls, just know that when we do terminate, my door is still open. Like you can come back a year later because you've just had another bad call. It doesn't mean that, because you've done a month or so of therapy that that should hold you. No, I think if anything, they're aware of the calls that do rattle them. They're even more aware after doing some work, and they're quicker to text or call and say, I think I need to come in and talk about this one.
I'm actually finding a wonderful phenomenon in that the first responders are seeing how effective EMDR is with the job-related, either the calls or the betrayal trauma or the moral injury, that they're more likely to say to me, you know what, I want to work on that thing from childhood. I want to work on that thing that happened in high school. Right. I would say for me, I have more responders that stay on and ask to do all of that work too. So it's a great phenomenon. It's proving itself, the whole model.
Right.
Okay, great answers. The next clip's going to be answering the question, what similarities or differences do you observe between veterans and first responders in practice?
The idea of putting either the mission or the patient first, the self does not come first, it comes last. The idea that both populations will just show up when called on at the drop of a hat, that this is a part of them that they don't turn off. This is who they are all the time. Right. It's ingrained in the blood, if you will. One of the disparities or differences is in the trauma load, that military service members who are deployed or who experience military-related trauma, it can be one incident, maybe multiple incidences, and then it's about managing the impact of those trauma exposures, whereas first responders have chronic trauma exposure. Reintegration is a concept that works for both as well. Military service members reintegrating back into, civilian life or coming home from deployment, even if they're still active duty. But then first responders reintegrate shift to shift.
Wow, she said a lot. there. You know, it's in their blood to respond. That's so true. They never turn it off. If they see someone in need, they just drop what they're doing and show up. They don't even question it. So that's absolutely true. And then the difference between military exposure and to trauma and a career exposure as a first responder, you know, she's using the word kind of like time limited, like in combat for military, and chronic. And I think that does, it resonates with what I have experienced in military clients and first responders. And I have several that are both. And then the reintegration she talked about. So with military reintegrating into society, how that can be very difficult because it's really hard to find such a close-knit group when they come out of their service. And on the other hand, with first responders, shift to shift, coming home from a really intense shift, how do you come back into the home, into your family? So, you know, she's really highlighted a lot of important concepts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then Stacy touched on the fact that we dance a very unique line with some of our responders who have veteran history as well. And very often we're dealing with a bucket that's full from childhood, which then led to the military, which could have a full bucket there. And then they go to a third bucket of first responder career. And so for us to tease through all of that material with them, and for them to also understand how those three things are intertwined and how they impact each other and what feeds which one more, figuring out where we're going to start our work. So there's so many nuances and things to think about with our hybrids. I think of them as hybrid clients because they're coming with both hats on.
And to survive the career with a sense of longevity, that you don't crawl across the finish line, that you sprint across, you got to know what you stand for.
Knowing that we have additional stressors, that means we have to take on the responsibility of making ourselves more resilient.
And on game day, we must succeed as a team. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed.
Most superhero origin stories, they're all stories of post-traumatic growth. You're like the Hulk that's been exposed to gamma radiation, and now you have this super ability because of that trauma you've experienced.
Before you became a firefighter, paramedic, and EMT, whatever it is, you were a human. You started off as a human, that human's got to be taken care of, and then we can take care of other people.
Next clip is going to talk to the question, how do you handle hearing about graphic or traumatic incidents from first responders?
Having seen and heard a lot in my career kind of keeps me ready. There's still always going to be that time, though, where something comes out of somebody's mouth that I never anticipated hearing. But as long as I know that that could happen, I can respond in a way that is supportive and clinically appropriate versus being in shock about it. And I think one way that we can prepare more people in the field to work with the first responder population is to teach it more at the graduate course level, in that we can talk to people about what working with this particular culture could be like, and working with people in this culture would be like, what they might hear from somebody who is out in the field doing, you know, a fire call or an EMS call or a police call or even an emergency department call. You know, when people come into the ER docs and nurses are seeing some pretty horrific things as well.
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to Kurt and thinking trauma therapists who work with first responders have a parallel process with their first responder clients, because first responders have to be ready for anything. They have to be ready to get to that scene and have everything totally upside down and not what was told to them on the dispatch. And, you know, as a trauma therapist, if you want to work with first responders, you have to be able to roll out the same way to your scene. Right. And if you think of your office as a scene, this is how our responders feel. They go to work and they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what they're going to hear or see or feel. And so if you want to understand your responders, embracing you're a responder too in your own right. And this parallel duality that's going on, it fascinates me to think about it actually. But we have to be able to roll just like they do. And so if they see us rolling with it and working with it, and that we weren't fully prepared, but we're going to head it on and take it on, that's also modeling for them, not only that we can do it, but how they can think of it and the mindset that can go on.
So I think Kurt's idea of perhaps in graduate school, identifying that this is a different population, and so they're the memories that they come in with are going to be way more graphic. Certainly that would help. But it's, I think for myself, because I'm not a first responder, I just sort of I learned by, one client after another, and then got to the point, like, I really, I need to be open-minded here, because this person might come in saying, I'm just having a little trouble sleeping, and I'm more anxious than I usually am. And then when they get into, the details of the memories, it's and what's shocking too is that something that I would find, really taxing to have to witness, that might just be their run-of-the-mill call that they're just rattling off and that they're used to, right? So you have to really be prepared as a therapist for first responders for anything to be talked about. That's just, it's so important to not be shocked.
Great. Okay. So next question we're going to look at is, do you find you can easily roll with dark humor, and is that effective in building rapport with first responders?
Oh, it's absolutely effective in building it, being able to tolerate it, being able to understand it, where it's coming from, being able to respond with some of my own. It's actually kind of freeing for me as a clinician sometimes to, let my guard down and give it right back. So I think that helps build rapport a lot, because part of the issue with first responders in general is that they want to make sure they're talking to somebody who gets them on the level that they are at. And if you can roll with their humor, or you can roll with how they describe things and not be shocked by it or not be offended by it, you're going to have a good relationship, is what I found.
So as Kurt was talking, I was cracking up because it absolutely resonates with me. And it's important not to be offended by the gallows humor, the dark humor, because that's partly a coping mechanism when you're working with somebody who shift after shift, they see some horrific things. It's really how they, kind of blow off some of the tension with each other, is to joke around. And if they can share some of that with you and you can just roll with it, then they feel safer that they can share, some of their, as they'll say, twisted humor. But I laugh right along with it. What I would encourage therapists not to do is to engage in like the frequency of foul language. Because if you're trying to force a connection and try to seem cool, they can see right through that. So the F-bombs, other cursing that they just naturally rolls off their tongue. It's really not cool to then start talking like them. So just a word of advice.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think we have to be very realistic and honest about this part too. I think trauma therapists are also a different breed of therapist. And I don't feel like every therapist is cut out to be a trauma therapist. In some ways, we're more like first responders. So we use dark humor sometimes to cope with each other about what we're dealing with. And again, it's not disrespectful. It's not offensive. It's not directed at human beings. And I think that's something that's very misunderstood by therapists in general and civilians about the first responder population, is that what they're doing and saying is not meant to be disrespectful or hurtful or disgraceful to anyone. It is a way to cope with being up to your eyeballs in sadness and grief and death just about every single day. I mean, I think all first responders see some of the underbellies of the world on a daily basis. For police, they're seeing crime. They're seeing horrible pictures of people who've been murdered or wronged. And for EMS, They're seeing every bodily function every day. So in order to cope with such an abnormal world and an abnormal level of exposure to the negative things, this is something that gets developed organically and naturally as a way to cope.
Great stuff. Well, we're going to circle back to where Kristin was earlier talking about the concept of reintegration. The question is, how do you help first responders navigate transitioning from work mode to home life?
When it comes to first responders, I think there's a big piece about helping to normalize what their experience really looks like, that when they come home or come off shift, that there's a stress dump, if you will, which is trying to come back from that hypervigilance of being on shift all day long, or what it looks like to gear up to go onto shift. Yeah. So trying to help people understand that some of these experiences are very normal and to be supportive of what they need to navigate them. That's how I like to show up for them the most.
I think it's important for us as the therapist working with first responders to ask about their routines and rituals and to educate them on a transition process between work and coming home. What are you doing with that time? Do you have a commute? Do you not have a commute? Understanding what the process is. And most of them look at us and say, I don't have a process. I just drive home and walk in the door. But then they tell us that there's an argument that ensues, or their children come to them with a problem that may seem a little bit minor based on what they were just dealing with at work, and they may poo-poo it. So we really have to focus on that with them and ask them those questions and help them figure out, how can you transition home better? Do you need to walk in the door and shower and then attend to your family? Like, what are those strategies that you need?
And to have a game plan with whoever is at home, you know, like, this is what I need when I come home. I need 5 minutes, or I need to go take a shower, get changed into something different. I need 10 minutes by myself up in the bedroom just to do some deep breathing or whatever before I come down and engage with the family.
Calling all mental health professionals, join us for the Clinician Masterclass series working with first responders, and empower your practice with expert insights and actionable strategies, brought to you by the Responder Resilience Podcast. This isn't your typical podcast. Dive deep on working with EMS and 911 personnel with seasoned therapists Dr. Nicole Navega and Bonnie Rumely. Sonny Provetto shares specific knowledge and tools to support police. Dr. Stacy Raymond offers professional insights on working with veterans. Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia covers working with firefighters in a clinical setting. And Dr. Kristen Weldon explores cultural competency and the fire service. Get ready to transform your practice. Subscribe and stream anytime on our channels: YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay in the loop and sign up now at ResponderTV.com. So now we're going to look at the relationship that therapists can have with an agency or department and how they develop that. The question is, what have you done to build trust with agencies so they are inclined to invite you to be a resource?
I started to, I guess, gain a little bit more of a rapport, and people started to learn more about me when I was invited to join some of the peer support membership meetings. Okay. So people got to see my face a little bit more often and heard my name a little bit more often.
You do ride-alongs?
I have one scheduled for next month.
That's
yep.
Cool.
So very excited.
Yeah.
Yep, very excited.
So different from Kristin, I started off with ride-alongs and, sitting with a bunch of firefighters around the dinner table and just, listening to what they had to say and maybe asking a question and having them explain to me, like what they deal with from day to day. Same thing with police. I went on several ride-alongs with police, and then I was asked to join a peer support team. So it's really important to be around, the departments, and so that they can get a sense of you, because otherwise I'm not sure how people get a foot in the door, with agencies. But, Bonnie being an EMT, she's just already well connected, so that helps.
Yeah, it's important to, if you want to be with this population, to know what that means. Know what it means to sit at that table, like Stacy said. Know what it means to get in the cruiser with them. Those ride-alongs and sit-alongs too. Going to your local dispatch center. Some places do not dispatch out of police and fire departments, but you can do a sit-along at the regional level. We find that generally when people ask if they can be involved and get to know, it's welcomed. I don't hear very many stories of the door being closed or someone saying you're not welcome here. And we've had clinicians in the past who baked something, brought it to the local fire department. During COVID, Stacy and I had a really interesting idea that we executed around the state. We wore masks, but we called it the Muffin Motorcade. And we would both bake for an entire weekend. And then we get a group of our responders together and we do a little motorcade and we go to different police, fire, EMS, hospitals, you name it. We went. And just to deliver something that we had made and that we took the time out of our day to go there, that opened doors. That got the FCTRT's name around. That got the idea that we run a peer-to-peer group on Fridays around. So you have to take yourself out of your comfort zone, but at the same time, it's small human gestures. You don't have to do anything on a massive magnitude. If you just let them know you care, they will feel that genuineness right away.
We're going to build on that last question by this next clip, which answers, do you visit agencies and participate in ride-alongs to become a familiar face to responders?
When we're looking to build trust with someone, we need to be in the space together. We need that connection. And so attending all of those events and doing a ride along and really immersing myself in their everyday allows them to trust that I have, that I'm invested in their care.
Right. And I would also add to that, one of the most informative choices that I made was to do Citizen Police Academy. And that was at Danbury Police Department. And I learned so much that even with having my father as a police officer growing up, I didn't really realize the behind the scenes, what each, type of officer, what their work entailed, and all of what they had to learn, with regard to laws. And so it was just eye-opening.
The way I work with first responders and getting a better understanding is by being really open and curious, asking as many questions as I can, and making no assumptions.
And for clinicians listening, it's really, really important to know that you have so much power in terms of what you can do with them if they trust you. And part of building that trust is not using them to become an expert. We don't want them to feel that we're interviewing them in our office just for our own edification and asking a lot of questions that aren't necessarily part of their treatment. But there are ways to ask during their treatment and during their therapy about the calls or about all of the thousands of acronyms that they use. Well, what does that mean? And don't be scared to ask. Don't be scared to say, well, what is an MBA? Because if you don't know something that's basic to a first responder, then they have to go back and explain all of that. So it is a fine line, but they're generally happy to teach people about their culture. So if you really don't know something, in this scenario with first responders and veterans, you can't fake it till you make it. Like, you just ask and you just flat out say, I don't know what that is. Would you mind? And we can make a joke out of it ourselves. Like, they can respond to that very well, but we're not using the entire session to educate ourselves on their culture.
I'll just add to that, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, that there may be multiple terms for the same type of thing, where one jurisdiction or state, you might call it an MVA, another place it's got another three-letter acronym, and that there are different ways that people operate or label things. Responders have different labels for things depending where you are in the country, and very different terms for even the jobs people have on different crews, on different apparatus. And so I think your point about asking the question is even more important, because even though you think you understand what an MVA is, where you live or work. It might be a totally different animal or just a different name in a different state or a different county. So great points.
Well, one more point is the use of slang. There is a lot of slang in the first responder world. You know, somebody who loves 50 radios and pagers and gadgets is a whacker. You know, like, why would a therapist know what that is? Or David used a word with me earlier today, me and Stacy, he was talking about a buff. You know, there's so much slang. So no one is expected to know all of those words. And even though we immerse ourselves in first responder culture, we don't know all of those words. So it's okay to ask about the slang too, because it's just as common as the legitimate acronyms are.
You know, there are just lots of opportunities to learn about this population. Then when you're sitting with a first responder, to just try to, you know, be yourself, be more casual. They are going to be anxious about being there. It's very hard for a first responder to pick up the phone and make that appointment. So to go out of your way to, you know, just be maybe even more casual than with a civilian, share something about yourself, ask them if they have any questions that they want to ask you, so that, you know, their anxiety level can come down and they can start the work of therapy. So I find working with first responders to be just so rewarding, because they're so dedicated to helping other people, right? And so it's really an honor to sit with the first responders and help them through their own pain when they signed up for, you know, helping other people. And so here they are, you know, reluctant to even having come in. You really have to, you know, appreciate them and welcome them.
I feel exactly the way that Stacy feels, and it is an honor and it's a privilege to do this work with first responders. And once you start that endeavor, it is infectious. And honestly, once you go there, you're never going to go back. It is such special work. And I know that Stacy and I, but our entire team, this is our passion. You know, we do everything under the sun we can on a daily basis to help this population.
Attending trainings, that's how I got involved with this organization, right? Is attending one of the trainings and feeling that this network of providers was so open and welcoming to everybody. And so I felt really special being a part of this, and I want to give back.
And for those of you who are kind of on the line or teeter-tottering, do I take this plunge? Yes, please take the plunge, because we need more of us. We need more teams like ours across the country to serve these needs. So on behalf of the team, I want to say that I'm so proud of the work that we do. Every single one of our team members cares and works their best and tries to be their best. So we are all super proud of the team's work. And you saw several of our new members today. You can hear their passion. So the work speaks for itself. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for listening.
Yes, I wanted to also thank those 4 clinicians who bravely went into the room to be interviewed. And thank you to Kurt Fuchs, Bonnie Luft, Kristin Lewis, and Jennifer Spirito from the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team for participating in this episode. Like and subscribe, YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, LinkedIn. Go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself, take care.